Since its strength is without equal, if you happen to stumble across Piedmon, you probably won't be able to do anything but curse your fate. As we would arrive to the Eternal Castle, the Dark Masters had all assembled, as the time had come to finally spring their plan into action. As with Machine Dramon, Puppetmon, and Metal Sea Dramon readying themselves, it was time for Piedmon to finally be the last Dark Master to greet the hero of Ancient, being OMEGAMON, or at least the hero in their side. As Warumonzaimon simply just stood by waiting for orders, it was obvious that Piedmon needed to enact its plan, as although the castle had been secured, it reminisced on the time shortly before after Machine Dramon had arrived to the castle, as they had decided they needed to do some other things, as Piedmon remembered the day it showed up before the castle was built. As we'd venture to the streets of a small digital city, we'd find the remnants of its population here discussing about an important topic, as each of them had their own thoughts on what was going on.
You can't let those strangers in.
That would be rude. They haven't done anything and they've only offered good things. As the mayor of this city, I am in charge of everything. If I am not called Gentleman Pumpmon, I don't know what I will say. But you must understand, Rebellimon. They aren't here to cause us harm. They're here to help. Trust me. I know what I'm doing is best.
You are a fool. They only follow you because you're the only Mega here. You have to understand. From what I've gathered from the data in the books, it's clear these are the ones that were forewarned about. Their existence is here to cause destruction to the digital world. If you help them, you'll be taking a deal from the devil.
Enough of this. It's time you see the error of your ways. As Manticoremon dropped to the area, acting as if it was just a simple beast itself, it made it clear to Rebellimon that if it pressed the matter anymore, it would be attacked and could suffer damage, as Manticoremon is clearly strong and under the control of Gentleman Pumpkinmon. However, with Rebellimon being banished from the city it's known as its home for all of its life, it was clear that something was wrong, as it could feel the air change immediately. As Gentleman Pumpkinmon finally was greeted by one of the people who had come, one of these Digimon had decided to greet it, being the one that was the most friendly, and its name was Piedmon. As Piedmon was extremely happy with its Joker face, it didn't seem to be any less of a friend. However, they couldn't have been wrong. As we would finally return to the skies, OMEGAMON had been searching for weeks after Machine Dramon had fled. From all the experiences that were taking place, it began to lose a little bit of hope, as it couldn't find in any direction where the Dark Masters had left to. After meeting 3 of them, it knew that there was a problem, as the last of those data mines that were stopped in the Metal Empire area meant that these Digimon were out for something important, as data mines have been causing destruction around the digital world. As OMEGAMON flew from area to area, it finally understood of a place where it could have been, a distortion that was taking place far away from where it had been in the Metal Empire. As OMEGAMON knew that eventually it might need to call upon its allies for help, it headed in the direction of this castle, where it finally arrived. As OMEGAMON realized this castle was oddly strange, as the rest of the area it traveled through was night, but it seemed like it was day here, something bizarre happened. A vortex appeared, one that it hadn't seen. As the vortex continued to spin, it was almost as if OMEGAMON broke a barrier. As OMEGAMON dove to the ground, it knew something was off. As the vortex basically warped away, as it revealed the true area, as though the castle still existed, it had a dark forest, as it was actually nighttime. With OMEGAMON landing, it was unsure of what was going on, as this dark forest felt lifeless. As, to its knowledge in the map, it believed that this area was supposed to be filled with life. Digimon were supposed to be spanning, as this was once a good city, a city filled with Digimon, but it wasn't sure. However, OMEGAMON was surprised, as out of nowhere, a sound was coming, something rolling towards it. And to its shock, it was Rebellimon. As Rebellimon actually stood against OMEGAMON, warning it that it didn't want it to come any closer. as any more outsiders would cause damage to this place. Rebellymon was preparing to make a stand against OMEGAMON. Although OMEGAMON was confused, it didn't understand what Rebellymon was talking about, as to it didn't see a city at all. But not wanting to listen, Rebellymon began to make an assault until OMEGAMON stopped it introducing itself. As to the shock of Rebellymon, it actually knew who OMEGAMON was, as Rebellymon would recant the stories, or recall the stories of the past, of when it used to be an Ogremon, and would read in the libraries of its home. It would read the books of the ancient, and it talked about a warrior who once appeared to save the digital world. Although the book was very small and old, and very hard to see the depiction, OMEGAMON matched the drawing of the Digimon depicted that saved the world from the great evil a long time ago. However, it said he had vanished, and OMEGAMON wasn't to return. And Rebellymon did apologize, as Rebellymon would tell OMEGAMON bluntly that they needed to find a way, that if he was really the hero, that he needed his help, as his whole city had been taken over by the Dark Masters. To OMEGAMON's shock and surprise, it knew that it was in the right area, as this must have been the castle that had been talked about by the other Dark Masters. As Rebellymon talked about how the Dark Masters arrived some time ago, specifically one that OMEGAMON did not know, as it described it as a clown, it said that it arrived and said it would help the city, as the city was already struggling, as much of the digital world had been for some reason. As it said, many of the Digimon had either departed, and the forest began to die, as the Dark Masters promised they would help out and take care of the city itself and assist. It was unclear whether they were telling the truth, but to Rebellymon, it knew they weren't trustworthy. As OMEGAMON decided that they had no other option, it asked if all the Dark Masters were here, as Rebellymon could confirm, saying that all 4 of them actually are here at the castle. However, only one of them ever ventures out, the one that he's met. The other 3 simply just come and go, or in this case, they're just staying, they haven't come out. OMEGAMON understood what it needed to do, as it told Rebellymon that if it could make it, it needed to do it a favor. As Rebellymon said if it would save the city, it would do anything. As Rebellymon was tasked to head in the direction OMEGAMON came from, as quickly as possible to head to a network terminal. A network terminal that would be on the edge of the area that it came from. If it could get there, it could contact Digimon from the other parts of the digital world, and it needed to do that if it was to draw its allies here to stop the Dark Masters. As Rebellymon understood the task, it asked OMEGAMON if it didn't want it to come with it, as they could go together, but OMEGAMON said there was no time. It needed to go, and Rebellymon would need to set out on this task. As they both split apart, it was clear that OMEGAMON had a lot to do. As it approached the gates that had been at the edge of the forest, it was shocked at the green color. However, in the middle, there was something strange, as almost if it seemed like an ornament. OMEGAMON approached it, but when he did, it started to flicker. As OMEGAMON was drawn in, it walked closer and closer as it began to absorb him into the area. And in a second, OMEGAMON was in nothing. In the next second, it was inside. As it wasn't sure where it went, it had assumed that maybe this was a travel network into the castle, believing that maybe the castle had its own network and set itself up so that it would have to be entered through a special key. However, OMEGAMON didn't have to wait for someone to join it, as a familiar face to others finally arrived. The gentleman Pumpkin greeted him. "Hello! It's nice to meet you. Most people don't visit us here. It's great to finally see people come back. Digimon haven't been here for a while besides us. How are you? It's nice to meet you. I'm the mayor of this city." OMEGAMON was confused, as it believed that from what Rebellymon was saying that it couldn't venture in, meaning that OMEGAMON had to be let into the castle in order for this to work and be greeted. However, Gentleman Pumpmon began to just spat off things over and over about how great the city is and stuff like that, as OMEGAMON was unsure of what to do, as it was pretty sure that a fight would probably break out at some point. Didn't know if this was an enemy, an ally, or just a victim of circumstance. As Gentleman Pumpmon told OMEGAMON to follow, it said if it would come, a lot of its answers could be fulfilled from its questions. As OMEGAMON didn't even ask a question, it was shocked. How did the Gentleman Pumpkin know that it had questions? As Gentleman Pumpkin began to show more of the insides of the castle, on the end of the hallway, 2 of its friends were waiting, as Bastemon and Black Tailmon were waiting for it, as OMEGAMON realized that at least there isn't a devoid area of Digimon, as some still exist here. But it was still concerned of what Rebellion said it doesn't know if it should trust them. As they were to reach an auditorium filled with chairs, Gentleman Pumpmon would tell OMEGAMON to have a seat, as both Bastemon and Blacktailmon would take seats as well. They were waiting for the show, as they were all happy. OMEGAMON thought maybe just a little too happy, but it didn't matter, as on the stage, the main actor showed a funny-looking Digimon, one that OMEGAMON had never seen before. Although OMEGAMON had never seen this Digimon, it knew that there was something different, as this Digimon, although dressed like a clown, was very interesting, as it began to do tricks, as it began to juggle balls. It even had a magic wand where it started to do light tricks and magic that OMEGAMON had never seen before and never encountered. It was clear that this Digimon was a showman, as maybe OMEGAMON began to watch into this act just a little bit more than he should have. As the final light spared down on this Digimon, it began to speak, saying that it was finally time, that it needed a volunteer from the audience to join it. As we would venture back to the seats, all of OMEGAMON's audience members began to jump for joy, saying they wanted to get on the stage, acting as if they were young Digimon themselves, as they wanted to be picked, yelling "me, me," and "here, I want to go," all that stuff. And all these words were being shouted. However, the spotlight landed on OMEGAMON, as OMEGAMON didn't volunteer. As OMEGAMON simply said it didn't want to be a part of the act, and it seemed that the other three were more up for the task. It would go back to the stage, as the Digimon's demeanor finally changed, as it said, "Of course, but you're the one that came here, so you're the one who has to answer." As, to its shock, Piedmon finally said, "OMEGAMON, we know you're here." As this got OMEGAMON stiffed a little, unsure, as no one mentioned its name, and Rebellion couldn't have come, so they already knew that it was coming. It was time to reveal the final Dark Master that had been waiting to meet the so-called hero of legend. As Piedmon did a little bit of its shaking dance, it finally introduced itself, as the Master of Control was here, and the fourth Dark Master had arrived. As Piedmon continued to just laugh its snickery laugh, it would go, "You really came here alone, didn't you? This is going to be a momentous occasion. I'm finally going to be able to have the best act of all." As OMEGAMON stiffened, it knew it was time for battle, as all three of the audience members, besides OMEGAMON, still were cheering, waiting to see what was going to happen. OMEGAMON prepared for battle. However, Piedmon was and truly lived up to its case of the show was going to continue, as from its hands something manifested, something OMEGAMON had been tired of seeing. These were the Black Gears. As Black Gears began to manifest, Piedmon finally said, "It's time for the final act to begin. Let's see my last trick." As he began to lob the Black Gears into the audience, all the audience members caught them, as all of them jumped for joy, happy that they had gotten something from their favorite entertainer. However, they began to absorb into it, as OMEGAMON knew what was going to happen, as these Black Gears were going to give these Digimon a power boost, and OMEGAMON was not happy that it was going to have to fight these Digimon that seemed all innocent as they could have been. As they began to pump up in power, he knew the situation was getting worse. As, unfortunately for OMEGAMON, since Piedmon's in complete control, or at least the Dark Masters are, the area warped again, as OMEGAMON realized that they were being warped from place to place through the use of control. As although he can't be immediately booted down or restricted from his power, OMEGAMON realized that Piedmon was able to control the areas at will. And in this case, it finally began, as they were warped to a city streets that OMEGAMON was unsure of what happened, but was more interested in the fact that they looked exactly like the maps it had seen, believing that this must have been how the city was supposed to look. As all three of the newly boosted Digimon now stood in front of OMEGAMON, it did not want to fight them, as it realized that they were not really dangerous in and of itself. However, this was not the choice, as Piedmon arrived with its trump sword in hand. It told the others to attack, and to show OMEGAMON how we entertain strangers, as all three different attacks hit, as a Gentleman Twister, a blasting fire, and a light of darkness hit OMEGAMON. It was clear that this was not going to be a peaceful resolution. As OMEGAMON got hit with the attacks constantly, all Piedmon did was laugh, as it would snicker, going, "Hee hee hee hee, the final act is taking place. Now you will stop and end your race." As obviously, for some reason, he likes to do poems and whatnot with rhymes, Piedmon likes to be annoying, as it believes that it's always in control, being its characteristic of choice. However, OMEGAMON was not in a mood to take this lightly, as it finally powered up and pushed them all back. OMEGAMON was not pleased, as it told Piedmon that they weren't strong enough, as OMEGAMON believed the best option it had in this case was to try to get through to the Digimon and tell them to stop following Piedmon, as Piedmon is a dangerous Digimon and a Dark Master. It seeks the destruction of the digital world, as OMEGAMON tried its best to tell them to stand down, as it doesn't wish to harm them, and Piedmon is using them. However, they retorted, as Gentleman Pumpmon would simply tell him, "He saved us. He gave us more life. He made the place better. Can't you see? It can be whatever we want." But OMEGAMON would retort that this isn't real. If Piedmon's simply changing the place to place to make it suitable for them, where were the other Digimon? As finally the others realized that one of the biggest absences was the lack of other Digimon, as there used to be many Digimon, but they all seemingly disappeared until only these three were left. But as this talk would continue for them to figure it out, we would venture back to the forest, where we would see an unfortunate sight. As a Pumpkinmon with the Manticoremon from before was now chasing Rebellymon, as they were chasing it through the forest, as it overheard the conversation. As Rebellymon was outcasted from the city, forced to live away from them. However, this was not the chance, as the guard of the actual city itself, the gatekeeper, Manticoremon, and this Pumpkinmon were shocked when they saw Rebellymon return, as they were overheard OMEGAMON's conversation. It seems that Pumpkinmon is one of the only ones that actually knows the situation with the Dark Masters. As being given extra power, it definitely decides to fall out with the roles of the Dark Masters and helping them accomplish their mission. So stopping Rebellymon from bringing allies for OMEGAMON was definitely one thing to do. As unfortunately for Rebellymon, it would get pinned up to a tree, as the capture net launched from Pumpkinmon made it easy to catch it. As Rebellymon would simply yell,
"You monster! You let them kill everyone!"
As Pumpkinmon would just simply laugh, as it would say that it didn't really matter what the Dark Masters did, they wouldn't have stood a chance anyways if they resisted. So if you can't beat them, join them. As Manticoremon slowly crawled closer and closer to Rebellymon, it was clear that it was going to enjoy eating Rebellymon, and then Pumpkinmon would be happy, as it would probably get praise for the situation. However, this was not going to end the way it wanted to, as all of a sudden the loud sounds of cutting could be heard, as a simple drop of a blade cut across the air, and finally the net was cut, as Rebellymon would find itself free. And all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, Manticoremon and Pumpkinmon were blasted by electricity. Something began to shock them. Although it was unclear of what it was obvious that it was enough to at least weaken them. And for Rebellymon, this was its opportunity, as it took the chance to defeat both of them. Even before it could ask for who had ever aided it, Rebellymon had to keep in its task, as with both of those Digimon now defeated, it had to hurry to getting the allies, as two Digimon unknown to everyone else was already on their way to assist, and they wanted to get there quickly. As the three remaining Digimon argued among themselves, they came into question about Piedmon's usage of them, as all three of them kept back and forth about how Piedmon is great, but also how Piedmon is bad, as the other Digimon simply disappeared, and they're not sure where, as Piedmon just said to ignore them, as their world was whatever Piedmon allowed it to be for them. But this fighting grew tiresome for Piedmon, as Piedmon finally got angry. After putting its sword away, it finally decided to yell back at the Digimon, telling them that if they're not going to listen anymore and behave the way that he wanted them to, he was taking control. As all three of them were bewildered of what that meant, Piedmon simply said it was fun to keep them around. But this was the end, as Piedmon began to pull its hand back further and further, something began to happen to the other three Digimon. As all three of them began to grab at their face, something strange happened. Into OMEGAMON's distaste, it began to show, as all of a sudden their faces began to change. As Gentleman Pumpmon's face began to warp, the orange of his face started to disappear as it became white, and the head hat that was important was replaced with funny looking hair, as Bastemon and Blacktailmon felt the same sensation. And to the horror of OMEGAMON, it was true, as all three of them now had the face of Piedmon. As Piedmon said, finally, "They were never alive. I only kept them around because I felt like I needed somebody to distract others when they came. Those black gears, yes, the black gears, they came from the other Digimon. I turned them into the energy needed, and now that these three have become failures, it's time to deal with you." As the three, now Piedmon-faced Digimon, looked towards OMEGAMON, now being lifeless puppets, as from out of nowhere, strings appeared out of their backs. As it was clear, the Digimon that were there were no longer. As the strings began to pull, OMEGAMON knew what was going on, as from the sideline emerged Puppetmon from the shadows, as this was finally time, as it was time for the Dark Masters to take on OMEGAMON, as OMEGAMON was told, since that they're in their dimension, it's over. As from around OMEGAMON, it realized that this wasn't the only Digimon to appear, as snaking around from the emptiness, Metal Seedramon appeared, and behind it, there was Machinedramon. As all four of the Dark Masters now readied themselves, they had what they needed, as now the three Digimon were warped back into black gears, as they would be absorbed into the Dark Masters, as it was finally time to enact their revenge and defeat OMEGAMON once and for all. As the trump swords were thrown, and the smash of the hammer, the blast from both Metal Seedramon and Machinedramon were too much, as OMEGAMON was finally blown back, as the dimension world that they're in, although is solid, cannot house all this damage, as finally, from the dust, the world that was shown around them was here. As yes, it was definitely a castle, the one OMEGAMON saw from before, but everything made sense. Gone was that city, and gone was the little stage that had visited not too long ago. Now was an empty, dark, ravaged castle, empty, devoid of life, and numerous injuries to it, as it was clear that the Dark Masters probably, after they were able to control the first three Digimon, eliminated all other Digimon who resisted, and those that did not swear their loyalty to the Dark Masters were easily destroyed, as whatever their plan is, does not need extra Digimon. As OMEGAMON got back up, it realized that it was finally the time to defeat them. However, before this was able to be enacted, all four of the Dark Masters raised their hands, as they told OMEGAMON it was time to enact their plan. As from out of nowhere, they all closed them, and systematically across the digital world, the data mines went off in 4 specific areas, the areas that OMEGAMON had already visited. As back in the Metal Empire, an explosion was felt, and seemingly as well in the forest area long ago where OMEGAMON had visited, an explosion was there. Timely on the coast, another one exploded, ripping an area near the net ocean itself, and finally OMEGAMON felt the entire castle shake, as Piedmon had detonated a data mine right near it. As this made no sense to OMEGAMON, but to the four, this was the plan, as 4 data mines strategically set off at once have now caused rifts across the digital world, and now will begin their plan, as OMEGAMON is being told that from Machinedramon that the plan was always to do this, as the rifts will cause damage and bring a new apocalypse to the digital world. As this didn't make sense to OMEGAMON, it was clear that it needed to hurry. However, with the new powered up Dark Masters, they were giving it trouble, as for the first time in all of its fights with the Dark Masters, OMEGAMON was struggling, as it was also believed that since Yggdrasil had been trying to seal the remaining data mines, OMEGAMON was losing power. Although it wouldn't be able to split apart, it knew that it wasn't going to be empowered anymore as much as it normally would, and was forced to fight them by itself. And as finally the Mugen cannon blasted OMEGAMON to the ground, it seemed that for once the hero was at its wit's end. And as the Dark Masters approached, it believed that it was finally time to end it. However, it was not, as a shining red and golden light finally emerged,
as they towered through and knocked back the Dark Masters, as beside OMEGAMON were two Digimon they had never seen, as both finally said they were here to aid the hero that had saved them. And to the shock of OMEGAMON, Crest Garurumon and Blitz Greymon finally arrived, as they said they were going to end the Dark Masters once and for all. And that's where this episode ends today. So as always, this is Brad from the Ant Army signing off, and for all of you out there to sign on.